The ranch owner screamed for help as the wild horse dragged him through the dust, but no one expected who would step out of the shadows to save him. They said the black stallion was cursed, that it had killed every man who tried to break it. But on a cold Wyoming morning, when the proud ranch owner was thrown and begging for help, a stranger stepped out from the old forge, her hammer echoing 3 times in the wind. From that moment, nothing on that land would ever be the same. The morning broke pale over the plains of Wyoming, where the wind carried both dust and memory. From the wide corrals of the Cole Ranch came a single, desperate cry, hoarse, masculine, tearing through the thin light like a whip crack. "Save me from this wild horse!" A swirl of motion followed, hooves slamming, ropes snapping, men scattering like dry leaves. The stallion, a massive black creature streaked with ash along his mane and tail, tore through the pen like a storm with a heartbeat. His name was Ashfall, and the name fit him. Born from fire, tempered by ruin. Travis Cole, the ranch owner, once the legend of the rodeo circuit, hung half out of the saddle, one boot caught in the stirrup. He'd ridden broncs that broke men twice his size, but this was different. Ashfall didn't buck in rage. He bucked in panic, as if fighting ghosts that no one else could see. The air filled with the metallic tang of sweat and fear. Travis hit the ground hard, dust rising in a golden cloud around him. Men rushed forward but stopped short. The horse's eyes were wide, pupils blown like twin eclipses. With every slam of his hooves, he struck the earth in a rhythm. 3 beats, pause, 1 more. It wasn't random. It was ritual. "Hold him down," someone shouted. But no one dared. The animal circled once, nostrils flaring, trembling from something deeper than rage, something remembered. And then, from across the yard, a figure stepped out of the shadow of an old forge. The clang of a hammer echoed once, twice, 3 times. Slow, measured, deliberate. The sound cut through the chaos. The horse froze. Dust swirled around the woman like smoke from an old fire. Her name was Eleanor Hayes, though most in the town had forgotten it. 2 years ago, she'd been fired from this very ranch. Too stubborn, too gentle, too strange, people said. But now she stood where no one else would. Travis, gasping in the dirt, lifted his head. His hat lay yards away. His pride even farther. He stared at the woman framed in morning light, her hair streaked with early gray, her gloved hands steady as stone. "You," he croaked, "you should have stayed gone." Eleanor didn't move closer. She looked at the trembling horse instead, voice low but sure. "He's not wild, Travis. He's afraid." The foreman spat into the dust. "Afraid? He nearly killed you, sir." But she wasn't talking to them. Her eyes stayed on Ashfall, whose chest rose and fell like the swell of a tide. Brief second, the wind stilled, and in that silence, the horse's ear flicked toward her. 3 knocks had brought him close. The same rhythm that once meant pain now meant something else, something he could almost trust. When Eleanor finally turned away, Travis struggled to his knees, clutching his wrist where a bone had cracked. His men surrounded him with questions, but he waved them off, his gaze locked on the fading figure of the woman walking back to the old forge. Her hammer struck again in the distance, 3 slow, even blows. Clink, pause, clink. And every man standing there felt something unspoken shift in the air. like a story that had started long ago was beginning again. That night, the town of Larkspur buzzed with the news. Some said the horse was cursed. Others whispered that the woman had bewitched him. Travis sat alone in his office, hand bandaged, eyes on the framed rodeo photos lining his walls. In every picture, he was younger, taller, louder, untouchable. Now, he could still hear the sound of her hammer carrying through the night wind. 3 beats. A pause. 1 more. Out in the dark, Ashfall paced his pen, head low, breath coming slow. The ranch lights shimmered against his black coat, turning dust into silver. Travis poured a drink he didn't want and whispered into the empty room, "I don't need her. I don't need anyone." But the wind disagreed. It rattled the window pane once, then twice, then a 3rd time. Somewhere in the forge, Eleanor's hammer answered. And for the first time in years, the man who owned everything realized he no longer owned the silence. By the next morning, the story had spread like prairie fire. In the diner at the crossroads, ranch hands swapped versions of it. How the wild horse had gone mad. How Travis Cole had nearly broken his neck. How the old blacksmith woman had stepped out of the smoke like some ghost from the past. They called her Iron Ellie, half in jest, half in awe. Eleanor Hayes, though, paid no mind to talk. In her workshop at the edge of town, the air was heavy with the smell of coal dust and hot iron. The forge, long cold, burned again for the first time in 2 years. Each strike of her hammer echoed down the valley. 3 steady beats, a pause, 1 more, measured like a heartbeat she was trying to remember. Sparks climbed the dark rafters, falling back like tiny comets. Luke Ortega came by before noon, his hat clutched to his chest. He was barely 20, face browned by sun and work. "They said you're back," he began, awkward but earnest. "Mr. Cole doesn't want you near the corrals." Eleanor didn't look up. She turned the glowing shoe with her tongs, her voice calm. "That's fine. I'm not near the corrals." Luke hesitated, watching her quench the iron in water, steam wrapping around her like breath. "You saved his life yesterday," he said. "You should take credit." She smiled faintly. He wouldn't call that saving. He'd call it luck. When she finally met the boy's eyes, there was something in her gaze, steady, deep, the color of riverstone. "Tell me, Luke," she asked, "how long have you been hearing the knocks?" He blinked. "The knocks?" "3 of them," she said softly. "Always 3. Metal against wood, hoof against ground. They've been training him with it." Luke frowned, thinking back. Sometimes when we loaded the gear, when we cleaned the tack room, he'd shiver when he heard it. We thought it was just nerves. Eleanor nodded, her jaw tightening. Nerves have reasons. Out on the Cole ranch, Travis tried to bury the incident under paperwork and whiskey. His hand still shook from the fall, though he told everyone it was just a sprain. When his foreman suggested selling Ashfall before someone else got hurt, Travis's voice went sharp. "I'll sell him when I say so. He's worth more than any of you can count." But that night, alone in the barn, he caught himself watching the horse through the half-light. Ashfall stood motionless, breath misting the air. Each exhale matched the rhythm of distant hammer blows from the forge across the ridge. For reasons he couldn't name, Travis felt the same rhythm echo in his chest. Back in town, Eleanor finished reshaping a bent stirrup, one that had been brought to her by a frightened ranch hand years ago. Its edge bore faint notches, 3 little scars cut by a blade. She ran her thumb over them, remembering. 2 years earlier, she'd warned Travis that the rodeo trainers were breaking horses with pain, not patience. He'd laughed, told her she didn't understand business. Fear gets results, Ellie. You can't whisper them into obedience. She'd left that day without a word. Now the ghosts of that philosophy had returned. One of them with hooves and ash in his mane. Outside, Luke waited by the door, nervous under the weight of her silence. "Ma'am, why'd you come back now?" he asked. Eleanor leaned against the doorway, watching the sky fade from blue to silver. "Because I heard something that wasn't supposed to still exist," she said. "The sound of a creature asking for mercy." She turned the forge fire lower, wiped her hands on her apron, and faced the wide plain where Cole Ranch sat dark against the horizon. "He's not wild," she whispered. "He's remembering." Luke followed her gaze, uneasy. "Mr. Cole won't let you near him." A spark jumped from the forge, hissing in the dust. "Then he'll have to stop me from listening," she said. That evening, when the wind picked up, carrying the scent of iron and burned grass across the valley, Travis stepped out onto his porch. He caught a glimpse of a dull red glow on the far hill, the forge alive again. He muttered a curse under his breath. She's stirring up trouble. But the words had no conviction. In the distance, faint but clear, came the sound of 3 hammer strikes. Clink, pause, clink. Ashfall lifted his head in the corral, ears turning toward the echo. Travis felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. For the first time since the fall, the mighty owner of Cole Ranch closed his door, not to keep out the cold, but to keep out a truth that was beginning to breathe again. The next dawn came soft, wrapped in the pale blue hush before sunrise. Mist curled over the fields like breath, and the sound of restless hooves echoed from the corrals. Luke Ortega was already there, leaning against the fence, his hands buried deep in his coat pockets. He hadn't slept much. The image of Ashfall, still tense, eyes like molten silver, had followed him into his dreams. When he saw Eleanor walking up the dirt path, carrying her hammer and a small leather satchel, he straightened. "Mr. Cole doesn't know you're coming," he said, voice low. "I'm not here for him," she replied, stepping through the gate. "I'm here for the truth." The horse turned his head at the sound of her boots crunching on gravel. Morning light slid across his coat, revealing something Luke hadn't noticed before. A rough patch of skin burned into the flesh of the shoulder, a faint mark in the shape of a tilted A. It wasn't the Cole Ranch brand. The edges were uneven, the tissue shiny. Healed, but cruelly so. Eleanor stopped a few feet away. "You see it?" Luke nodded, his throat dry. "That's not ours." "No," she said. "That came from before." She didn't reach for him. She just watched, letting the silence hang heavy. Ashfall's ears flicked toward her. He shifted, one hoof pawing the dirt. Each scrape landed in that same rhythm again. 3 strikes, a pause, one more. Luke counted without meaning to. The pattern chilled him. "Who would burn a horse like that?" he asked. Eleanor's eyes stayed on the mark. "Someone who wanted obedience more than partnership." Her voice dropped. "There used to be a rodeo school south of here. They taught control with fire. Pain leaves faster on skin than in memory." Ashfall snorted, muscles rippling. Eleanor lowered her gaze, careful not to meet his eyes directly. "Easy," she murmured. The word was barely sound, more breath than speech, but the stallion's tension eased, as if the vibration alone mattered. From the house porch came the slam of a door. Travis Cole, hat low, shoulders stiff, strode toward them. His boots ground into the frost. "What the hell do you think you're doing in my yard?" Luke started to answer, but Eleanor spoke first. "Looking at something you should have seen a long time ago." Travis's gaze followed hers to the scar. He stopped short, jaw tightening. For a moment, there was something almost human in his face, a flicker of confusion, maybe guilt, but it hardened quickly into anger. "That horse was branded before I bought him. Means nothing." "Means everything," she said quietly. The air between them felt brittle. A crow cawed from the fence post, the only witness. Luke wanted to step back, but Ashfall didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on Travis, unblinking. "You want to play savior again?" Travis sneered. "Fine. But don't bring your little sermons onto my land. That horse is dangerous. You think a burn mark made him that way?" Eleanor didn't flinch. "I think the people who made the mark did." For a long time, Travis said nothing. He turned as if to leave, then stopped. "You talk too much for someone who never listened when you worked here." She let the insult pass. The wind lifted strands of her hair, streaked silver in the light. "Listening doesn't mean obeying," she said softly. "You still don't know the difference." Travis's hand twitched near his belt buckle, a gesture old cowboys used when they wanted to hit something. Instead, he exhaled through his nose and walked away, muttering under his breath. Luke stared after him. He won't admit he's scared. Eleanor brushed dust from her gloves. Fear's the only language some men ever learned. Later that afternoon, she went to the feed barn. Among the dusty tack and old bridles, she found a box of spare horseshoes, and tucked beneath them, a set of iron stamps. Letters for branding, R, C, W, and at the bottom, that same crooked A. The edges were blackened with use. Her stomach tightened. She took one in her hand. The metal was still faintly oily. Luke appeared behind her, startled. "You found something?" "Proof," she said. "Someone's been using the same mark that hurt him. Maybe not recently, but they never stopped carrying it." Luke frowned. "Why keep it?" "To remind themselves who held the power," she answered. "Until the day that power burns them back." She left the barn quietly, the brand wrapped in a rag inside her satchel. The wind had picked up, rattling the tin roof. Out by the corrals, Travis's voice carried, shouting at the foreman about new buyers, new deals. Words like market value and insurance policy floated through the air, sharp and soulless. That night, as the ranch settled into uneasy silence, Eleanor sat outside her forge, staring at the crooked A lying in her palm. She set it into the fire until it glowed orange, then quenched it in water. Steam rose like a ghost. When it cooled, she carved a new groove through the center, breaking the symbol in half. In the corral, miles away, Ashfall lifted his head suddenly, nostrils flaring. He let out one deep breath and stamped the earth once. Then again. Then a third time, soft, almost like agreement. At the Cole house, Travis couldn't sleep. His dreams came jagged. The sound of applause from his rodeo days, the snap of a whip, the sight of a younger man branding a frightened colt. He woke sweating, staring at his bandaged wrist. For a long time, he listened to the quiet, waiting for it to end. When the wind rose, it carried the faint smell of iron, like rain before lightning. He whispered to the dark, "That damn horse is cursed." But deep down, under the words, he knew the curse didn't belong to the animal. It belonged to him. Travis Cole woke before dawn, the cold seeping through the thin quilt like a quiet punishment. His house was silent, except for the faint ticking of a wall clock and the occasional creak of the wooden beams. He sat at the edge of the bed, staring at his hands. Calloused, scarred, trembling slightly from pain or memory, he couldn't tell which. Once, those hands had held crowds in the palm of their applause. Once, they had broken broncos, thrown ropes like poetry, and signed contracts that built an empire. Now they could barely fasten a button. He limped to the kitchen, poured coffee that tasted of smoke, and stared through the frosted window toward the barns. Ashfall's dark shape moved in the corral, a restless shadow pacing. The mark on the horse's shoulder haunted him. That crooked A burned into its hide like the echo of his own arrogance. He told himself it didn't matter. But the lie didn't hold. When the foreman arrived, Travis snapped into the old role like armor. "We'll prep the horse for auction again," he ordered. "Word gets out he's dangerous, fine. Someone will still pay. Fear sells better than pedigree." The foreman hesitated. "Sir, he's not ready. The new buyer asked if you'd ride him again as proof." "I'll ride him," Travis cut in, his tone sharp as barbed wire. "You think a horse has got more will than me?" The man looked down, muttered something about liability, and walked off. Pride, Travis thought, had kept him alive in the arena when others broke bones, or worse. It would keep him alive now. That's what he told himself, anyway. Later that morning, he went to the tack room, the smell of leather and oil thick in the air. His old rodeo saddle hung on the wall, dusty but intact. He ran his fingers over the faded initials carved near the horn. TC. He remembered the day he bought it, the same day he'd met Eleanor Hayes. She'd been the new farrier then, quiet and stubborn, the kind who saw more than she spoke. She'd told him to loosen the cinch that day, said the animal's breathing mattered more than his control. He'd laughed, tossed her words aside, and cinched it tighter. He could still hear her voice. Listening doesn't mean obeying. The phrase irritated him, mostly because it had started to sound true. Travis turned to the mirror near the door. The man staring back was grayer, heavier, and smaller somehow. He adjusted his collar, hiding the old rodeo scar under his jaw. The papers on the counter, tax bills, feed invoices, insurance notices, blurred together. Every page carried numbers that told him the same story. The ranch was bleeding money. Selling Ashfall wasn't just pride, it was survival. That afternoon, he drove into town. The main street of Larkspur was a skeleton of its former self. One diner, one hardware store, a handful of shops still open. The local feed store had a sign in the window. Livestock loans, low APR, apply today. Travis smirked bitterly. Once, banks had begged him to borrow. Now he couldn't get a handshake. He stopped at the diner for lunch, the bell above the door ringing faintly. Heads turned when he walked in. Some nodded respectfully. Others whispered. Pride forced his spine straight. At the counter, he ordered steak and coffee, ignoring the murmurs. "Morning, Mr. Cole," said the waitress, a red-haired woman with a tired smile. "Heard about the fall." "Rumors run faster than sense," he muttered. She poured his coffee. "They say that blacksmith lady saved your hide." Travis's jaw tightened. "She's got a talent for showing up where she isn't wanted." From the corner booth, a pair of ranchers laughed under their breath. "Guess the wild horses got a better sense of justice than the rest of us," one said. Travis set his cup down harder than he meant to. The coffee splashed. "You boys forget who built this town?" The laughter died quick. He left money on the counter and pushed out into the cold, his boots crunching on the gravel. Pride had been his armor so long it was part of his skin. But armor rusts, and he could feel it now, the slow, painful crack forming. Driving back, he passed the old rodeo grounds. The grandstand was half collapsed, banners torn and faded. He pulled over, got out, and stood by the fence. The wind carried the faint creak of an old gate, the smell of dust and sweat still clinging to the dirt. This was where he'd built his legend, and where he'd first learned that fear could be shaped into obedience. He remembered the trainer who'd shown him the 3 knocks. The rhythm was supposed to signal dominance. It had worked, until it didn't. As he turned to leave, something caught his eye. A weathered poster still clinging to the back of the grandstand. Cole Ranch Rodeo Championship, featuring Travis Iron Hand Cole. His own face stared back, younger, blazing with confidence. He tore the poster down, folded it once, then stuffed it in his pocket. When he got home, the sun was sliding low, staining the fields with bronze. Ashfall stood near the fence, ears pricked toward the distant clang of Eleanor's forge. The rhythmic sound rolled across the valley, clear as a bell. Clink. Pause. Clink. Travis gripped the top rail, leaning close enough to see the brand again, that cruel letter A, now faint under winter light. The horse's eyes flicked toward him, calm but wary. "You're not breaking me," Travis said under his breath. "Not you, not her, not anyone." Ashfall exhaled through his nostrils, a deep sound that stirred the dust between them. For the first time, Travis noticed how the horse didn't back away, but didn't attack either. It was a stare between two creatures who had both lost too much to surrender first. When he turned away, his reflection caught in the window of the barn. An old man clutching the rails, shoulders drawn, pride holding him upright where strength no longer could. Inside, he poured another drink. The glass trembled in his hand. "Fear sells better than pedigree," he whispered again, this time like a prayer to convince himself. Outside, the wind carried the faint clang of the forge again, patient, unyielding, steady. Ashfall lifted his head and stamped once. And for a heartbeat, Travis thought he heard that same rhythm echo back, not from the forge, but from inside his own chest. The wind had turned colder, carrying the smell of snow down from the mountains. The ranch seemed quieter these days. Not from peace, but from waiting. The kind of silence that presses against the walls until something finally breaks. Luke Ortega felt it every time he walked past the corrals, and every time he heard the faint ring of metal from the forge across the valley. That rhythm had begun to live in his head, echoing even when the world was still. That night, he couldn't sleep. The bunkhouse felt too tight, too full of whispers about the woman in the forge and the horse no one could tame. When the moon climbed high, he slipped outside. The frost crackled under his boots as he crossed the yard toward the stables. Inside, the air was warm with the smell of hay and horse breath. Ashfall stood at the far end, his coat shimmering silver where the moonlight touched him. His eyes glowed like wet stone. Luke didn't mean to wake him, but the door hinge groaned, and the horse's ears flicked up. Then came the sound. Knock, 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 hooves hitting the stall floor in perfect rhythm. Luke froze. "Easy, boy," he whispered. The horse stilled. He could hear its breathing, deep and measured. When he reached the gate, he saw Eleanor standing outside in her long coat, hair loose around her face, the forge light still clinging to her skin. She'd come silently, as if drawn by the same invisible thread that had pulled him from his bunk. "You shouldn't be here," Luke said softly, though he didn't mean it. She nodded toward Ashfall. Neither should he. Eleanor moved closer, resting a hand on the wooden rail. The horse watched her without moving, nostrils quivering. "It's the rhythm," she said. "The sound they used when they broke him. 3 strikes. Always 3. Luke frowned. "You mean training?" Her eyes didn't leave the animal. "No. Punishment." The word hung in the air like frost. She reached slowly into her coat pocket and pulled out something small, the broken branding iron she'd found. The crooked A now split clean through the center. Luke's stomach tightened. "They used this?" he asked. She nodded. "It's the mark of a man who thought pain could teach loyalty. It taught memory instead." Ashfall shifted, hooves scraping the ground once, twice, 3 times. Eleanor breathed in through her nose and replied with 3 soft taps of her hammer handle against the fence. Slower, gentler. The horse's head dropped a few inches, his muscles loosening. "That's it," she whispered. "That's listening." Luke had seen men tame horses his whole life, but never like this. Not with silence, not with rhythm. He felt like he was watching a prayer being answered in metal and breath. "Why does he trust you?" Luke asked. Eleanor smiled faintly. "I don't think he does yet. But I speak the same language, the one that starts in pain and ends in patience." The barn door creaked again. Both turned. Travis Cole stood there, his face hard, his silhouette framed by lantern light. He looked older than he had a week ago, eyes sunk deep under the brim of his hat. "You two have lost your minds," he said. Eleanor didn't move. "You still think the horse is the problem." "I think you're trying to ruin me," Travis shot back. "You and your stories about scars and memories. He's just an animal." Ashfall snorted, stamping once, as if to disagree. Eleanor's voice dropped low. "Then why does he remember your voice better than your touch?" Travis stepped forward, anger flashing. "I don't need a sermon from a farrier who couldn't keep a job." She held her ground. "No, you need a conscience." For a moment, no one breathed. Then the horse's hoof struck again, 3 times. The sound filled the barn like thunder. Travis flinched. The rhythm hit something inside him he didn't want to name. "Stop that!" he barked. But Ashfall didn't stop. Eleanor raised her hammer handle once more, tapping the fence in reply. Slower this time, like a lullaby. The horse's hooves quieted. The air trembled with something that felt like understanding. Travis's jaw clenched. "You're making him worse." "No," she said. "You made him worse. I'm teaching him that not all knocks mean pain." He looked at her, speechless, then turned on his heel and stalked out into the night. The door slammed. Luke exhaled, shoulders sagging. "You shouldn't push him like that. He'll fire you again." Eleanor brushed dust from her sleeve. "You can't fire someone who's already gone." They left the barn together, the cold biting sharper now. Above them, the stars burned like scattered nails across black iron. From somewhere behind, a single hoof tapped the earth once more. Soft, hesitant, alive. The next morning, the ranch woke uneasy. Travis didn't mention the encounter, but his orders came colder. He told the foreman to tighten security around the corral to stop the blacksmith from coming near. Men whispered that the auction would happen soon, no matter what. Luke tried to keep his head down, but he caught sight of Travis later that day, standing by the fence, watching ash fall through narrowed eyes. The man's hand twitched near his hip, fingers brushing the handle of his old riding crop. He lifted it halfway, then stopped. The horse didn't move. Neither did he. For a full minute, they stood like that. Two creatures locked in the same cage of pride and fear. Then Travis lowered his arm and walked away, muttering under his breath. That night, Eleanor hammered until the stars blurred in her eyes. Her hands ached, her shoulders burned, but she didn't stop. Each strike sent sparks into the darkness, each echo a message. 3 knocks don't have to hurt. When she finally let the fire die, she heard something faint on the wind. Distant, steady, almost human. It was the sound of a single hoof tapping 3 times, answering her from across the valley. And in that fragile moment, the woman and the horse, neither wild, neither tame, shared the same rhythm. The morning of the auction broke too bright for November. The air was dry, sharp, and filled with a light that made every flaw visible, from the cracked paint on the barn doors to the dark half-moon under Travis Cole's eyes. Trucks rolled into the ranch one by one, engines humming, boots thudding against the frozen dirt. Men with money and empty hearts had come to see the wild horse of Larkspur. Some came for spectacle, some for a bargain, and some just to see if the rumors were true. Travis stood near the corral, his coat buttoned tight, his jaw locked. Pride had turned into armor again, and he wore it like a man walking into war. "Keep him calm," he barked to the handlers. "Don't let him see the crowd until I say." Luke Ortega adjusted the ropes nervously. He'd spent the last week feeding Ashfall in silence, trying not to think about the woman who'd taught him that silence was its own kind of language. He hadn't seen Eleanor since that night in the barn, but he felt her absence like a missing sound. When the horse was let out, the crowd pressed forward. Cameras clicked. Cell phones glinted in the sunlight. Ashfall came out slow, his muscles coiled, his head high. The scar on his shoulder caught the light like a buried ember. Travis stepped into the pen, hat low, voice booming. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're looking at is power. Pure, unbroken power." He said the words like he was still trying to convince himself. Eleanor stood at the back of the crowd, her coat collar pulled up, eyes hidden under the brim of her hat. Luke spotted her and gave the smallest nod. She didn't move. She just watched. Travis circled the horse, speaking louder. "They say he's cursed. I say he's misunderstood, and I'm going to prove it." The handlers exchanged uneasy glances. One whispered, "You're not riding him again, are you?" Travis didn't answer. He grabbed the saddle, cinched it tight. Every pull of the strap sounded like a dare. The bit gleamed in the sun, too clean, too sharp. When he slipped the bridle over Ashfall's head, the horse's ears flattened. Eleanor's heart knocked once, hard, inside her chest. She saw the stirrups, heavy, reinforced with a hidden locking piece near the base. She recognized the design immediately. Someone had modified them after she'd left the forge years ago, a cruel trick to keep a rider mounted even if the horse panicked. The same design that had crippled others in rodeo circuits. She stepped forward, voice clear. "Travis, stop. Those aren't safe." Heads turned. The crowd murmured. Travis looked at her, eyes narrowing. "You again." "Listen to me," she said. "That rig isn't standard. You use it, you won't be able to pull free if he bucks." Travis smirked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I don't plan on falling." The audience laughed nervously. Someone whispered, "Liability insurance." Another said, "Bet he still rides like hell." Eleanor's voice dropped lower, urgent. "Don't mistake courage for punishment. He'll remember what you taught him." Travis ignored her. He slid his boot into the stirrup. The sound that followed was a single metallic click. Eleanor knew it. The latch locking in place. Luke froze where he stood. Travis swung up into the saddle, gripping the reins. The horse stiffened, muscles rippling under the black sheen of his coat. The crowd hushed. For a heartbeat, the world was still. Then came the rhythm. Knock, knock, knock. Not from Eleanor's hammer this time, but from the fence rail, hit by some careless hand in the crowd. The sound carried through the air like a command from an old ghost. Ashfall's head snapped up. His eyes went wide, silver and wild. Travis pulled on the reins. "Easy!" But it was too late. The horse launched upward, front hooves slicing the air. The crowd gasped, stumbling back. Travis held on, his boot trapped by the hidden catch. Ashfall twisted, screaming in a voice that didn't belong to an animal. It was rage and terror mixed, the memory of pain reborn. Eleanor pushed through the people, shouting, "Open the gate! Let him run or he'll kill himself!" The foreman hesitated. Travis's voice thundered, "Don't you dare!" Then the bit caught the sunlight again, and something in Eleanor snapped. She reached for the gate latch herself. Luke ran to help, pulling the chain free. The gate burst open. Ashfall lunged forward, tearing out of the pen. Travis shouted, one boot free, the other locked tight. The saddle shifted. For one horrifying moment, man and horse became a single, writhing silhouette against the sun. Dust exploded into the air, turning the light into smoke. Then, silence. When it cleared, Travis was on the ground, gasping, the crowd too stunned to speak. Ashfall stood a few yards away, trembling but still. His chest heaved, his eyes searched the open field. The brand on his shoulder looked darker now, almost red under the light. Eleanor approached slowly. "It's over," she whispered. Ashfall's ears flicked. His gaze met hers, and for a fleeting second this chaos drained from his body. The world seemed to exhale. Travis rolled onto his side, coughing. He looked up at her, fury and shame twisted together. "You set this up," he rasped. "No," she said quietly. "You did, the day you chose pain over trust." The murmurs from the crowd turned uneasy. Some took pictures. Others turned away. The foreman knelt beside Travis, muttering, "You should have listened." Eleanor stepped back, eyes never leaving the horse. Ashfall lifted his head toward the valley, toward the faint clang of the forge that still lingered on the wind. He gave a long, shuddering breath, then walked past everyone. Not running, just walking, through the open gate and into the field. No one tried to stop him. As the sun dipped lower, Travis sat in the dirt, clutching his bruised ribs. Luke helped him stand, but the older man's pride weighed more than his pain. His voice broke when he said, "He's gone. My property. My reputation." Eleanor looked at him. "Maybe now you can learn what you really lost." Travis turned away. The crowd dispersed slowly, leaving behind cigarette smoke and silence. Luke lingered near her. "You think he'll come back?" Eleanor wiped dust from her gloves. "Not until he hears something worth returning to." She started walking toward the hills, where the wind carried the faint echo of 3 distant knocks. Not a warning this time, but a promise. Behind her, Travis stared at the empty horizon, and for the first time, he didn't see a beast escaping. He saw a reckoning riding away with his name branded on its shoulder. The wind hadn't stopped blowing since the auction. It howled through the broken gate, across the empty corrals, through the open valley where Ashfall had vanished. Dust clung to every window, every rail, as if the whole ranch were holding its breath. Travis Cole sat in his study with the curtains drawn, a glass untouched on his desk, and his pride bleeding slow beneath the bandages on his arm. Outside, Luke Ortega shoveled feed in silence. The others avoided him, afraid to speak about what had happened. The story was already all over Larkspur. How the great Travis Cole had been thrown in front of a crowd, how the horse had walked away calm as a preacher after confession. The local newspaper ran a small headline, "Wild Stallion Breaks Free, Owner Survives." A feed supply website had even picked it up, using the phrase "horse training gone wrong" to push their ads for new saddles and safety gear. Travis had seen it. He'd thrown the paper into the fire. Now the fire was dying too. The office smelled like whiskey and dust. On the desk lay the folded rodeo poster he'd torn from the old grandstand. The young man in the picture looked back at him. The man who once believed pain and pride were the same thing. When a soft knock came at the door, he ignored it. But the second came louder. Then the third, 3 knocks, deliberate, evenly spaced. He stood, wincing. "Go away." The door opened anyway. Eleanor stepped inside. The smell of forge smoke followed her, mixed with the cold. "You should have let the doctor look at that shoulder," she said. "I don't need you telling me what I should have done." She studied him for a moment, the bruised face, the stiff way he held his arm. "You can barely lift your hand to pour a drink." Travis laughed once, short and bitter. "Doesn't matter. No one's buying anything now. The auction's done. The bank'll get its piece soon enough. You happy? You won." Eleanor shook her head. "No one wins when the truth's ignored." He looked up sharply. "What truth? That horse is dangerous? You saw it yourself." "I saw a creature trying to survive something that never ended." He opened his mouth to retort, but the words dried out. The memory of the moment before the fall flickered. Ashfall's eyes, not wild but terrified, that sound of metal clicking under his boot. His own breath had caught like a man remembering something he swore he'd forgotten. Eleanor moved to the window, pulling the curtain back. The valley stretched out gray and wind-scoured. "He's still out there," she said. "Horses don't run far if they have a reason to stay." Travis scoffed. "You talk like you can read their minds." "No," she said softly. just their silences. She turned, her gaze steady on him. Do you know why he stopped bucking right before you fell? He frowned. Because he was worn out. Because you hesitated, she said. For one breath you stopped fighting him, and he stopped fighting back. That's all it ever takes. Travis stared at her, the meaning pressing against him like a weight. Outside, the sound of hoofbeats drifted faintly on the wind, slow, uncertain. Luke appeared at the door, breathless. He's back, he said. They followed him out. Down in the far pasture, Ashfall stood at the fence line, mud splattered along his legs, coat dull with travel. He looked smaller somehow, but his head was high, eyes alert. The sight hit Travis like a punch. The men gathered behind them, whispering. Some reached for ropes. Eleanor raised a hand. No, let him come. Ashfall took a few steps forward, stopped, and pawed the ground. One strike, then another, then a third. Travis felt it in his chest, the same rhythm that haunted his sleep. Eleanor's eyes flicked toward him. He's asking if you're still the same. He swallowed. And what am I supposed to say? Say it without the crop this time, she said. He hesitated, every muscle tight. The men watched, waiting for him to bark an order. Instead, he took a step toward the fence, empty-handed. The cold air burned his lungs. Easy, he murmured. You're on your own now. Ashfall's ears twitched. The horse didn't move closer, but he didn't retreat either. The wind whipped between them, full of dust and something else. Forgiveness, maybe, or the chance of it. After a long minute, Ashfall exhaled, a soft whuff of air that made steam in the cold. Then he turned and walked along the fence, heading toward the river trail. He came back to remind you? Eleanor said quietly. Of what? Travis asked, though part of him already knew. That you can't outrun what you made. He turned to her, his expression brittle. You think you've got me all figured out? No, she said. I just see what you're still running from. For the rest of the day, Travis avoided the corrals. He limped through chores, speaking to no one. The men didn't ask questions. When night came, he sat alone by the barn, a lantern flickering beside him. Somewhere in the dark, he heard the faint echo of hooves again, not running this time, just pacing. He found himself speaking aloud. I tried to make him something better, stronger. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? The wind answered with a hollow sound against the barn wall. Knock, knock, knock. Travis shut his eyes. The next morning, he saddled his old gelding and rode toward the river trail. The frost was thick, the earth frozen hard. He followed the tracks until he found them, hoofprints deep in the mud, leading to the bend where the river widened. There, on a patch of frost-bitten grass, Ashfall stood drinking, calm as a whisper. Travis dismounted, keeping his distance. The horse lifted his head, water dripping from his muzzle. For the first time, Travis saw not defiance, but exhaustion. The kind of tired that comes from carrying too many ghosts. He dropped the reins and let them fall into the dirt. All right, he said quietly. I'm listening. The wind stirred the reeds, and far off, a sound rose from the valley, faint, metallic, 3 slow hammer strikes from Eleanor's forge. Ashfall flicked an ear toward the sound, and then back to Travis. The horse didn't run. Neither did the man. They stood in the freezing dawn, two survivors learning the hardest thing either of them had ever known: how to stay still. Snow came early that year. It fell in slow spirals over the valley, covering the broken ground of Cole Ranch, softening the scars left by hooves and pride. By December, the corrals were quiet, the air so still that sound itself seemed afraid to move. The forge, though, still breathed smoke into the sky. Every few hours, faintly from the hill, came the rhythm of Eleanor's hammer, slow, deliberate, like a heart that had learned not to rush. Travis Cole watched the hill from his porch each morning, coffee steaming in his hands. His arms still ached from the fall, but it was the kind of ache he didn't mind. Pain, at least, meant something was healing. What unsettled him was the silence that followed those hammer strikes. It filled the spaces between his breaths, as if waiting for him to answer. Luke Ortega had taken on most of the work now, guiding them, remaining horses to feed in the snow. He'd grown quieter, too, slower in speech, more patient. Sometimes, when he worked in the stalls, he'd mimic the rhythm of Eleanor's forge, tapping gently on the wood so the horses would settle. He told Travis it calmed them. "Can't argue with results," Travis muttered the first time he saw it. But something in him softened. Ashfall hadn't left the valley. Every few days, Luke spotted him near the river bend or on the ridge at dusk, standing like a sentinel against the fading light. The scar on his shoulder looked paler now, healed over into something that no longer screamed but whispered. One morning, after a long stretch of silence, Eleanor appeared at the ranch. She didn't knock. She never did. Travis found her standing in the barn, running her hand along the empty stalls. The smell of hay mixed with cold iron. "You came to check on the ghost?" he said from the doorway. "I came to see if the living were still listening," she replied. He smiled faintly, the expression cracked, but real. "You talk like a preacher." She shrugged. "Only when the sermon's worth hearing." They stood there for a moment, the quiet between them neither hostile nor easy. Then she reached into her coat and placed something on the feed table. A new horseshoe, polished smooth, no marks, no brand. "It's for him," she said. "Forged without fear." Travis stared at it. "You think he'll let me close enough to use it?" Eleanor looked out the window toward the ridge. "You won't need to. Just leave it where he can find it." He turned the shoe over in his hand, feeling its weight. It wasn't just iron. It was proof that change could be shaped by heat and patience. That night, under a thin crescent moon, Travis rode out alone. The snow crunched under the gelding's hooves, the cold sharp enough to bite through his gloves. At the riverbank, he dismounted, setting the new horseshoe on a flat rock near the water. "For you," he said softly to the darkness. "In case you come home." The horse didn't appear that night, or the next. But every morning, Travis returned to check. Each time, the snow around the stone was disturbed. Faint hoofprints, a sign that someone had been there. It was enough. Weeks passed. The ranch changed in small ways. The men worked quieter. The animals moved calmer. Even Luke started humming when he cleaned the stalls. When a feed supplier called asking if Cole Ranch wanted to sponsor a new ad for humane horse handling equipment, Travis didn't hang up immediately. He said he'd think about it. One evening, while checking fences, he found Eleanor near the north pasture. She was watching the horizon, her breath visible in the cold. "You ever wonder," she said, "if forgiveness feels like this? Not loud, not grand, just quiet enough to notice?" He nodded. Feels strange, not having something to fight. That's the work, Shishimahom said. Learning how to live when the noise stops. They walked back to the barn in silence. Inside, the lanterns burned low. Travis took off his gloves and rubbed his hands together. The skin was rough, but he could feel warmth again. Luke entered carrying a folded tarp. Found this by the ridge, he said. He laid it out, and on top of it was the horseshoe, the one Eleanor had left by the river. Except now, it bore a single dent across the edge, as if struck 3 times. Eleanor looked at it, smiling quietly. He found it. Travis ran his thumb over the dent. Looks like he left his signature. The 3 of them stood there, listening. Outside, the wind shifted, and from far off came a familiar sound. 3 soft knocks, not from a forge or a hammer this time, but from the frozen earth under hooves. Eleanor whispered, "He's telling you it's safe now." Travis closed his eyes, breathing deep. For the first time in years, he didn't see flames or falling. He saw the open field, the quiet strength of an animal that had survived every mistake a man could make. When he opened his eyes again, the forge's light from across the valley flickered faintly against the snow. The rhythm continued. Clink, pause, clink. Steady, human, alive. He turned to Eleanor. "You think he'll come all the way back?" "Only when you stop waiting," she said. "The stillness has to start with you." Later, when everyone had gone to bed, Travis stepped out onto the porch. The stars were clearer than he remembered, sharp enough to hurt. He could feel his heartbeat matching the slow, patient rhythm from the hill. Somewhere out there, he knew Ashfall was listening too. In that moment, man, woman, and animal shared the same silence. Not empty, but full of things finally understood. By the time the snow melted, the river had returned, not as water, but as a thin vein of dust cutting through the valley. Spring came reluctantly to Wyoming, painting the world in shades of gray and pale gold. Grass sprouted where hooves had scarred the earth, and the Cole Ranch, once loud with shouting, breathed quieter now. Travis Cole walked with a limp that no doctor could fix, but there was a steadiness in his stride that hadn't been there before. He'd stopped shouting orders, stopped pretending he could outwork silence. Luke Ortega noticed it first, the way the rancher paused before speaking, how he listened before answering. "Never thought I'd see the day," Luke teased one morning, brushing down the gelding. Travis grinned, faint but genuine. "Miracles happen when you shut up long enough to notice." He meant it. The ranch was healing, in its own slow rhythm. Eleanor Hayes still came by some evenings, her forge hammering faintly in the distance. She'd started teaching Luke the basics of farriery, shaping iron with care instead of force. Each time she visited, Travis felt that same uneasy gratitude he never knew how to say aloud. But the peace wasn't complete. Every sunset, he'd find himself staring toward the far ridge, where the dust drifted in long ribbons. Ashfall had been gone for weeks now. The horseshoe he'd left, dented with 3 faint marks, sat on Travis's desk like a small monument. It wasn't just a symbol. It was a conversation frozen in iron. One evening, a storm rolled in from the west, dark clouds swallowing the horizon. The wind rose, carrying grit that stung the eyes. Travis watched it from the barn doorway, feeling something stir. Not fear, not guilt this time, but memory. The same wind had carried him through rodeos, through youth, through mistakes he couldn't name. Luke appeared, hair full of dust. "Fence line's down by the creek," he shouted over the roar. "If we don't fix it, the cattle will scatter." Travis grabbed his gloves. Let's go. They rode through the rising storm, visibility shrinking to a blur of gray. The air was alive with motion, dust swirling like ghosts. When they reached the creek bed, the fence posts lay flat, half buried under debris. But something else caught Travis's eye. Hoofprints, deep and deliberate, leading down the dry river trail. He dismounted, squinting through the storm. He was here, he murmured. Luke followed his gaze. Ashfall? Travis nodded. The prints were unmistakable, large, steady, each stride long but controlled. He's heading for the canyon. Lightning split the sky. The sound shook the air in 3 quick bursts. Crack, pause, crack. The rhythm hit Travis like an echo. Without another word, he mounted up. Get the ropes, he said. They followed the trail into the canyon. The storm funneled through the narrow pass, turning the world to shifting sand and thunder. It felt like riding through the inside of memory, each gust stripping away another layer of pride. When they found him, Ashfall stood in the middle of the dry riverbed, head lowered, coat streaked with mud. He wasn't running. He was waiting. The sight froze Travis in place. Eleanor was already there. She'd arrived from the other side of the ridge, her cloak whipping in the wind. She didn't seem surprised to see them. He comes here every spring, she shouted over the noise. Same place, same time. Travis dismounted, boots sinking into the dust. Why? To remember, she said. This is where they burned him. The words hit him harder than the wind. He looked at the scar on Ashfall's shoulder, then at the ground beneath their feet, blackened earth half hidden under the sand. A faint smell of iron still lingered, old but not forgotten. Ashfall raised his head, ears flicking toward the wind. Then he stepped closer to Travis, slow and deliberate. The storm quieted, as if the air itself held its breath. Travis extended a hand. His fingers shook, not from fear, but from something deeper. Humility. I'm sorry, he whispered. The horse stopped in time, arm's length away. Then, without warning, he lowered his head and nudged the man's palm. Just once. Eleanor's voice carried softly behind them. There it is. The touch lasted only a heartbeat, but it cracked something open inside Travis that had been rusted shut for years. He blinked against the grit, unsure whether the moisture on his face was rain or remorse. Ashfall stepped back, then turned toward the canyon mouth. The wind picked up again, sending waves of dust spiraling into the air. Eleanor motioned to Travis. Let him go. He wanted to protest, to hold on, to claim some kind of redemption, but the look in her eyes stopped him. He simply nodded. Ashfall began to move, each stride strong and even. As he reached the bend of the canyon, thunder rolled again, crack, 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 and the horse lifted his head high, mane whipping in the storm. Then he was gone, swallowed by the dust and the light. Travis stood in the riverbed long after the rain began, the sound of water finally returning to the earth. Luke touched his shoulder. You all right? Yeah, he said quietly. For the first time, I think I am. When they rode back to the ranch, the world felt different, washed clean, lighter. The next morning, the air smelled of wet clay and new beginnings. At the edge of the corral, where the storm had torn down an old sign, something glinted in the mud. Travis bent to pick it up, a fragment of metal, half a horseshoe. It bore 3 small indentations, perfect and deliberate. He smiled. Guess he left me one last lesson. Eleanor arrived soon after, her eyes soft but knowing. What lesson's that? That not everything broken needs fixing, he said. Some things just need space to breathe. She nodded, and together they looked out over the fields where sunlight spilled like mercy. In the distance, the forge clanged once, not 3 times now, just once, a single note hanging in the still air. A promise kept. The year turned, and with it, the valley changed its color again. The high plains of Wyoming glowed gold beneath a soft spring sun. The same light that once revealed scars now fell warm and forgiving on everything it touched. Cole Ranch no longer carried the weight of its name like a burden. The fences had been mended, the barns painted anew. What hadn't been fixed remained simply as it was, proof of what survived. Travis Cole had grown quieter. The limp stayed, but the bitterness didn't. Each morning, he walked the fence line with Luke, sometimes talking about work, sometimes not at all. The silence between them had become its own kind of friendship, steady as the rhythm of hooves on open ground. Eleanor Hayes still came around, though less often. She spent her days working the forge, training Luke in the art of shaping metal with patience. At night, her hammer fell slow and even, and its echo drifted across the valley like a heartbeat that never forgot. People in town said they could tell the weather by her rhythm. 3 clear strikes meant calm winds, 2 meant rain, 1 meant change. For Travis, those sounds no longer haunted him. They kept him company. One evening, he rode out to the ridge alone. The grass whispered under the breeze. The sky bled red and purple where the sun slipped behind the hills. He stopped near the riverbed, the same place where the storm had once swallowed everything, and dismounted. The air smelled of wet earth and sage. From his coat pocket, he took out the broken horseshoe he'd found weeks ago, the one marked with 3 small dents. He turned it over in his hand. The metal had dulled, edges worn smooth, but it still carried the memory of touch, the kind that hurt once, but healed over time. He knelt and buried it under a flat stone beside the trail. "You earned your freedom," he whispered. "Guess it's time I earned mine." The wind shifted. For a moment, he thought he heard hooves in the distance, a steady rhythm rolling low and deep. He looked up, scanning the horizon. At first, there was nothing. Then, faintly against the dying light, a dark shape appeared on the ridge. Ashfall. The stallion stood still as the sky behind him burned gold. His mane lifted in the breeze, silver streaks catching the last sun. He didn't come closer, didn't flee. He just watched. Travis felt his throat tighten. "You came back," he said softly. The horse flicked an ear. Then came that sound, the one that had once meant pain, then fear, and now something else entirely. 3 slow knocks, hoof against rock. Travis smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "Yeah," he said, voice barely a whisper. "I hear you." The stallion turned, walking along the ridge toward the open fields. With every step, dust rose behind him like memory rising from the past. Never gone. Just quieter. When he disappeared over the crest, the world seemed to hold its breath. Travis stayed there long after dark. When he finally rode back, the valley was wrapped in silence, broken only by the rhythmic call of the forge from across the hill. Clink. Pause. Clink. Eleanor was there, hammer in hand, the firelight painting her face gold. She looked up as he approached. "You found him?" "I think he found me," Travis said. She nodded, as if she already knew. He always knew where to look. He dismounted, watching the sparks drift upward into the night sky. "Funny," he said. "All that time, I thought I was teaching him something. Turns out he was waiting for me to listen." Eleanor smiled, the kind of smile that comes from knowing both pain and peace. "That's how healing works," she said. "It waits." They stood there together, watching the fire burn lower, the night deepening around them. The world was still, but not empty. Somewhere in the dark, a single horse moved across the plain, free, unseen, alive. When the forge finally went silent, Travis turned toward the open sky, closed his eyes, listening. Not for the hammer, not for the wind, but for the space between them. In that stillness, he heard it. One last sound, faint but clear. Knock. Pause. Knock. Not command, not memory, but acknowledgement. The sound of something forgiven. He smiled, hat in hand, and whispered into the night, "Good boy." The wind carried the words away across the valley, over the sleeping fields, past the river of dust until it reached the horizon where the horse had gone. By dawn, there was only silence, and it was enough. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below. What part stayed with you the most? Leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe for more stories about second chances, quiet courage, and the bond between people and horses. There's another story waiting for you next week. Don't miss it.